welcome back to my channel. This is Prepping by Faith, and today I'm going to share with you a Thanksgiving special of what's in my prepper pantry. And I thought this would be very timely since, this week is going to be Thanksgiving week. I know a lot of you probably already have the ingredients and things you need for this year's Thanksgiving, but this might just give you some ideas on other things that you can be stocking up on as far as how you would do something more shelf stable for your Thanksgiving dinner. I think many of us are still blessed. We have access to the grocery stores. We're still able to get the things that we need. And so we're able to incorporate a lot more of those fresh ingredients. But as this inflation sort of takes off, as we see these companies cutting back, there is potential, for job loss in the near future. And so being able to access your pantry for these kinds of things like your holiday meals is a good idea to have, all of these ingredients put up as sort of a just in case, a backup. I am going to talk about some grid down elements with this as well. But let's go ahead and get started on this. So the first thing I'm going to do is just kind of share with you what I was thinking in regards to turkey. So obviously, if you didn't have a turkey already in your freezer, you would need to have some sort of a turkey component. So we have stocked up on the Keystone turkey. There is some natural broth in there that you could access as well to use towards your gravy, or your stuffing or whatever it is you wanted to use it for. I would definitely not drain that broth off there. I would utilize that in whatever it is I was making. So the other thing is, I know a lot of people in the community, my mother included, has actually pressure canned her own turkey meat in jars. And that would be another wonderful way to have turkey and then also have access to those drippings, that broth that was off of there, so that you can make some really tasty gravy off of that. Now, if you didn't have that, a turkey that you had pressure canned yourself, then what you could do is you could go ahead and make your own gravy from scratch. So you would take some chicken broth, you would take a bouillon cube. You're also going to need some butter. So you're going to need a little bit of butter and flour to create that roux initially. So one of the things I definitely want to touch on is having, things like your flour in your preps. Butter, you can keep butter in your freezer for up to a year, so that's something that you can already have plenty of on hand. If you don't, you can still go ahead and mix up some powdered butter. But you would go ahead and put those ingredients together to create a roux, and then you would add some chicken broth, you would add a bouillon cube, and then you would put a little bit of your Worcestershire sauce in there, and salt and pepper to taste. So that is an easy way to go ahead and have some tasty gravy. Rather than the canned stuff on hand, it's going to have a lot more flavor, and people are going to enjoy eating that a lot more. Now, as far as stuffing goes, we can always have things like this stovetop, and I have this for an absolute emergency backup. But I think it's so much better to go ahead and make your own. So one of the things you guys can do is, if you have bread that's sort of, left over that you haven't eaten, or some that you have made yourself that you didn't finish in time, you can go ahead and dry this out in your oven, and then you can put it inside a jar and vacuum seal it. This is a wonderful way to utilize that bread later to make things like either croutons or your stuffing. So you could use that. You could take your chicken broth, some butter. I have out here some of these onions, so you could go ahead and rehydrate these, and some celery, and incorporate that into that mixture, along with some sage and, of course, pepper. So that is an easy way to make stuffing. It is so much better than eating something like a stovetop. So I did want to touch on that. Can't forget the potatoes. So what I have right here are some Betty Crocker ones. So we have the roasted garlic. You do have more of the regular style. All of these are going to need some sort of butter in them. Also, they do make the sweet potato, so you could also reconstitute these if you didn't have your canned sweet potato to make a sweet potato casserole that you needed. So these are really wonderful. They store flat. They last a long time. I would definitely have these in your preps. If you don't like Betty Crocker, there is the Idahoan. There are so many different brands. I would recommend just grabbing a couple of these. They're not that expensive. I think these were $1.08. and test them out. Figure out which ones that you like and then store them up accordingly. Obviously, things like your cranberry sauce that you can already put in a can that you've already got purchased and stick inside of a refrigerator. Now, as far as grid down components, let's say you've lost power. So for our family, one of the things that we have done is we have purchased a little tiny refrigerator. It's right over here. And that's something that we have backup for so that we can run it off of a generator as well as keep power running to our largest freezer. And so that is what we have done to make sure that we have refrigeration. If you are, let's say, in a more winter climate, I know a lot of us have much colder weather outside. So the other thing you can do is if you have things like coolers on hand, you can always keep things refrigerated if you keep them outside and then put something heavy on top so the animals can't get inside of it. So I wanted to touch on that because there are still ways of accessing refrigeration. So this right here are just some components that I have as far as making pies. So you are going to definitely need sugar. You're going to need flour. You're going to need some sort of a lard, a little bit of salt, and then you're going to need your butter to get that butter flavor into those pies. So you can bake pies, obviously in your oven if you have access to your oven, but if we're in a grid down situation, you can utilize a deep Dutch oven. You can put a trivet inside of that to sort of lift up that pie pan a little bit, and they do make cast iron pie pans as well. So you would put a lid on it. You can put coals on the top and on the bottom. You just have to watch how many so that way you don't burn your crust or anything in there, but that is something you can do. So I've seen where people have baked, fruit pies in there, so you could obviously do things like your pumpkin from scratch where you have to bake that shell with the pie filling inside of it, but you could also do something quicker where you just cooked the pie shell and then made a more of a pudding style type pie like your chocolate here. So I have here some, cook and serve pudding that you can mix up. One of the things my mom does in her recipe is she uses heavy cream and some cocoa powder and a little bit of sugar just to really enhance that chocolate flavor and make it, a lot tastier. So that is something that you can do. The reason I have this media crema here is because that is a good substitute for something like a heavy cream. The other thing I had thought, and the reason this is sitting here, is this is actually, if you didn't have, say, your cocoa powder on hand, but you wanted to add a little more of that flavor in there, something like a hot chocolate mix, you could sub and add some of that in there. I think that would really enhance that flavor. So I just wanted to kind of come up with that for you guys, bring that up. You obviously need things like your milk in there. So this Gosner whole milk is a great option. We have the evaporated milk. That is wonderful in your pumpkin pie, which is why that is sitting here with the pumpkin. You could obviously mix up a powdered milk as well. These boxes of Dream Whip is a great way to mix up that whipped cream that you want on top of those pies. Obviously, guys, you've got to have your spices. So things like your nutmeg, your ginger, your cinnamon, which is right back here. You need all those ingredients. We put molasses in our pumpkin pie. That is why that is sitting out here. So these are things I want you guys to think about as far as making desserts. So the other thing is we also do a Jell-O. I know that is something that a lot of families do when they are at the holidays. So having a large box of raspberry Jell-O and then your canned fruit to go inside of that. So you could either put a cocktail or you can put peaches and pears or whatever it is. You could even put some, dehydrated fruits inside of there because they're going to rehydrate really easily. So I would consider, adding things like that. We like bananas in ours, but I'm sure that if you had the banana chips, you could go ahead and toss some of those in there and they would rehydrate nicely as well. So this is, a great shelf-stable item to have in your Thanksgiving meal. The other thing I wanted to touch on, obviously a lot of these things call for eggs. So you're going to want to have, some way of accessing eggs. Now, a lot of us in the community have actually already frozen a bunch of our eggs, and those will keep for up to a year. But you can also store things like this dry whole egg powder to reconstitute and use in your baking. So here what I have is just a can of cream of mushroom with roasted garlic soup mix. That is something that people will use to make the green bean casserole that everybody loves at the holidays. So you would put that in there, some soy sauce, And then the onions, obviously I don't have a can of the French onions out here, but I did want to touch on how you can go ahead and make those. It's really simple, and that's the reason why this buttermilk blend is actually out here. So if you have access to your onions, you're going to go ahead and slice those really thin, and then you would soak them in some buttermilk for 10 to 30 minutes. You're going to coat them in flour and salt and pepper, and then you're going to fry them up in some sort of oil that you have on hand. And that is actually going to taste a lot better than that stuff that comes out of the can anyway, and it's going to add a lot more flavor in there. So I wanted to mention that. Having things like these biscuit mixes on hand or a corn muffin mix are wonderful as well. And then the reason I have these olives out here, I know a lot of us like sort of the hors d'oeuvre type things out in our that we kind of put out ahead of time. So you might add that with, your cranberry sauce that you had. If you have bricks of cheese, you can freeze those in your freezer and then thaw those out and cut them into slices that you could serve with, and some crackers of some kind. So you could sort of create a prepper pantry style charcuterie of sorts, obviously without, the sliced meat, but at least you have, your crackers, your cheese, your olives, that sort of thing. So these are just some ideas to get you guys thinking about other things that you might want to add to your prepper pantry as far as stocking up for the holidays. I did want to touch on one other thing. I know a lot of people like to make the sweet potato casserole as well. So, obviously having things like your canned sweet potato that you could make that with, the spices, everything to go in that, the components. But as far as, that topping that you need with the marshmallows, this jet puffed marshmallow cream, I'm sure you could use this in a pinch to put on top of there and, heat up in the oven, get that broiled effect on it. If you didn't have that, a lot of people have taken their marshmallows and have actually dehydrated them and put them inside of a container. So that way you still have access to marshmallows that could then, rehydrate in there as well and be that topping. So if you haven't thought about that, that's just another thing that I wanted to toss out there for you guys. So if you guys have enjoyed this video today, please give me a like, share, and subscribe. I really wish you guys all a wonderful Thanksgiving. I hope you guys have a happy Thanksgiving. Please go ahead and add your tips, your tricks, any recipes that you guys have come up with as well that you want to share with the community, because I think it's wonderful that we all do things a little bit different. We've all thought through things differently. I'd love to hear what you guys have to add to this conversation. Let's keep it going and really help everybody start thinking about these sorts of things as we go forward in the years to come, as far as creating our more shelf-stable Thanksgiving holiday meals. So remember to pray, prep, and put God first. God bless.